Hello, everyone. I want to do a review of 3030 ESPN, the New York Knicks. And I'm going to try not to say too much. I'm going off the top of my head. And one of the things that really stood out about the part of the documentary that I saw was Bill Bradley said that he was spit on. Now, I probably have read a book. It was either by someone else and or Bill Bradley, where they mentioned that there was racial resentment toward him and that he was getting advertisements that the black players weren't getting, and that he had, passed up some of the advertising money to keep the resentment from the black players down. And I'm old enough to remember the championship Knicks, but I did learn some things from this documentary. Now, I've had a younger person tell me once about, well, you lived through certain things, but I'm thinking about, hey, I still would need to maybe learn from a film or from information. So it's not strictly because I'm an older person. I separately had someone tell me that I felt that Ali was faster than Ray Leonard. He said, well, because that was from your generation. All right, well, the same thing could apply to him. Ray might have been closer to his generation, and he thinks that. And then I told him, I said, well, check out Ali and Cleveland Williams, which many said it was Ali's best performance, where he was shuffling all over. He was very dominant. Well, let me get back to basketball. I had someone before tell me that I kept getting off topic. I might put ETC in the description or whatever, because, I'd like to maybe mention some other things as well. But getting back to Bill Bradley, so they were saying that, if I understood it, that Bill had a big-time game against Cazzie Russell, who I do remember in college, which is reminiscent of the Magic Johnson had played Larry Bird in college. But, and then they were saying about, I think Bill was drafted number 1 or high up in 65. And see, I wasn't aware of that. Now, they said that they started calling him Dollar Bill because he had one of the highest money contracts of that time. I wasn't aware of that either. I thought that they called him Dollar Bill because you could count on him like money. I mean, the dude had a very outstanding outside shot, and it would hit the bottom of the neck and of the net, and it was a high arching shot that would often go in, so he could hit that open shot. Dave DeBusschere also was good at the long range shots. Now, which reminds me of during the documentary, and I had heard about Jerry West making a very long shot and that they had called him Mr. Clutch. And of course, he is the logo of the NBA. And he had made a 70-foot shot, but the Knicks wound up winning that game in a championship series. And they showed Jerry West saying that had there been 3 points, plays at that time, that would have been the end of it, because when you look at these scores and things, they did not have the three-point play for a long time in the NBA. They had a separate league called the American Basketball Association, where they did have the three-point shot, and that, I think, when a few teams from the old ABA joined the NBA, that was eventually adopted. They had a team. I'm here in Washington D.C. They had a team, and used to be in the burbs or whatever, but they had a team in Washington called the Capitals, and Rick Barry, considered one of the all-time greats, white guy, used to play. And then he had a strange free throw shot where he would have the ball underhand and throw it. Now, Wilt Chamberlain basically had a lot of trouble with the free throws, as did Shaq. And I have seen Wilt on occasion also take the ball underhand and try to hit the free throw shot. But now he didn't do that over much of his career that I saw. And I think I was aware of Wilt kind of, I guess, in the mid 60s or whatever, but I really wasn't watching the basketball that much. I saw in the documentary that Bill Russell's Celtics had beat the Knicks. Now, I don't remember that, but I certainly remember the championship year. And I looked at the replay, and they did announce that Willis Reed was from Grambling, which was a black school. And I remember it was a mega deal when he came hobbled out there sick. It was probably on the front page. It was huge news. And I remember telling my aunt, who has passed, I say, he only scored 4 points. What is the big deal? And she, like everyone else, said that, well, he inspired the team. And during the documentary, they were saying they don't know why Wilt wasn't rougher on Willis Reed. And of course, Dave DeBusschere had went into played center to go up against Wilt. And speaking of centers, they eventually brought in this white guy named Jerry Lucas, and they said he played forward. Now, I don't remember for certain whether Lucas used to play center or at some point played center for the Philadelphia 76ers, or he may have played forward next to Wilt. I mean, I could look all this up, but I'm going off of memory. Let's see, what else? Now, they were saying about how the Knicks had helped each other out, and I eventually had heard that Willis Reed did cover up for some of Walt Frazier's mistake. And of course, Willis Reed was a fierce competitor, had a very focused look on his face. And I had mentioned something to that effect to my grandmother, and she says, well, some people just hate to lose. And they, on the documentary, talked about the fashion plate that Walt Frazier was. And I very much remember that. They did call him Clyde Frazier. He had the wide brim hats and, like they said, the fur coats and all of that. I know one time I heard one of the commentators was talking about Bill Walton and says, well, Bill Walton is a plain guy who's not for the fancy cars and the flashy clothes. And the other commentator was saying that, well, if that's what makes Walt happy, basically, then so be it. why knock Walt Frazier? I happen to remember in the Jet magazine, I don't know whether they're out of business or strictly online now, which was a little small black magazine. It was maybe 5 by 4 inches in size. It was a small magazine. They were famous for having what was called the Jet centerfold, where they had a woman in a bathing suit. And I think that some people probably were upset that they claimed that it was mostly light-skinned women in the Jet magazine. But anyway, I remember a picture they had of Walt Frazier, not completely nude, but I guess almost. And he had his legs crossed with no pants on and tilted over to the side a bit, which was quite risque back in the day. And I'm trying to remember if one time in one of the games where I believe Jerry West was limping and did outplay Walt Clyde Frazier. And they showed on the show that Frazier said he had scored 36 points, I think in the same game that Willis Reed had hobbled out into the court and had a lot of assists and steals and whatnot. I didn't realize that Walt had such a great game for that game in the finals. And they talked about Red Holtzman's, sorry to be kind of jumping around a little bit, coaching style and whatnot. And of course, Phil Jackson had played in a reserve role under Red Holtzman. I remember one time in particular when they brought Phil Jackson off the bench and his arms was just waving like a madman trying to keep somebody from inbounding the ball. Let's see. Now, getting back to Bill Bradley, they had said like Cassie Russell had actually got in a fight with Bill Bradley. Now, I didn't know that it was that serious. And eventually, the New York Knicks brought Earl the Pearl Monroe, and Monroe in the interview was saying that they were saying that here are some of Earl's pearls, and he claims that that's how he got the nickname Earl the Pearl Monroe. And I mean, Earl was the star for the Baltimore Bullets in terms of just being flashy and cool. I mean, the dude had a lot of spin moves. He would a lot of head fakes and sometimes would pump fake him underhanded and pop the ball up in there. And he was just tremendous to watch. He really was. And I remember one year that they did get past the Knicks. So I was watching this thing on TV, and then they said Earl had never got a championship before. So apparently, then I realized, well, the Knicks and the Bullets were in the East Coast, and apparently that was the time when the Bullets had got past the Knicks, and I guess either got beat by somebody else in the playoffs or in the final. I do remember that the Bullets had lost to the Milwaukee Bucks with Lou Alcindor. I believe that was in 4 straight. And Lou Alcindor later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And Lou Alcindor had played for the Wizard of Westwood, John Wooden, who I think had won maybe well, a whole lot of championships, and his teams never lost for a long time. And I believe Bill Walton had followed Lou Alcindor over at um, UCLA. So let's see what else happened in that documentary that stands out. Um, yeah, they eventually brought Earl Monroe over to the Knicks, and I remember, and it was mentioned on the TV that more or less about Earl had to um, defer to Walt Clyde Frazier, and they were saying how they was wondering how the two of them were going to mesh, but Earl sacrificed his being flashy and everything to be a part of that team with the New York Knickerbockers. Willis Reed, of course, later became, I think, a coach with maybe the Nets, and then later moved up to the front office. The TV show had mentioned about they had Bill Bradley, a Rhodes Scholar, and it said other people that went on to do well in school. I can't remember who the other big brain was supposed to be with the Knicks. I remember reading once about how more or less that Bill Bradley had been promoted and was saying that if he ever became president, that might add some prestige to the NBA. Oddly enough, Michael Air Jordan did endorse Bill Bradley, eventually Senator Bill Bradley. I believe it was for president, but they said that Jordan's mom had asked him to campaign for a black fella in Carolina who was going against, I forgot the senator's name, a senator who was considered to be prejudiced. And Jordan would not get involved. Now, I don't know if that was a time where Jordan said, well, Republicans buy my shoes too. But he did endorse Bill Bradley. And he had got so upset about the Bulls not rehiring Phil Jackson that I think he basically quit. And some people say, well, you're willing to stand up and lose the megabucks over because of Phil Jackson, but not for anything else. Now, I had a little dispute with one of my neighbors here who was saying about Phil Jackson had the superstars, which a lot of people say, but which was true, of course. But I looked it up, and Shaq had joined the Lakers the same year that Kobe did. And they did have Coach Dell, and they say they were saying about how Kobe the first 2 years rode the bench, but eventually the two of them did play together, and this was before Phil Jackson came to the Lakers. I looked up about Jordan and Scottie Pippen, and I see that Pippen joined the Bulls, I think, about 3 years after Jordan did. And the two of them together were coached before Phil Jackson got there, and they started winning championships. I used to work with an African who was a huge Akeem Olajuwon fan, and he kept saying he loved to minimize Jordan. And he was saying that, well, it wasn't Jordan, it was Phil Jackson. He says, how Jordan hadn't won anything until Phil got there. And I'm sure Phil helped greatly, but come on now, you got to give Jordan his props, as they say. let's see. The show mentioned Dean Miminger, who I do remember, and they were saying that he played a pivotal role, I think, with the Knicks with one of their victories. Now, some people were talking about how long the Knicks have been irrelevant, but when Pat Riley was coaching the Knicks, they pretty often did get to the playoffs, and they were known as a roughhouse team. They had this guy, Anthony Mason, I think his name was, who was a big burly center. I don't really remember whether he came along after Patrick Ewing or whether he played forward with Ewing and maybe a little backup. I do remember from the TV show they were saying that Jerry Lucas was a backup to Willis Reed, and maybe he played some forward too. Let's see, what was I talking about? I'm just trying to think what else might have caught my attention. Now, they did say that they built a new Madison Square Garden in New York, and they claimed that no other team had the celebrities that were at the Madison Square Garden, which is interesting since the Lakers eventually became known for having a lot of the celebrities. Jack Nicholson in particular was always sitting at the court side, and a host of other celebrities. Now, they mentioned in New York they had Woody Allen and a number of other celebrities. Now, ironically enough, Spike Lee was a great admirer of Woody Allen, and I guess more or less patterned his style or did some of the things that Woody Allen did in terms of directing, acting in the movies like Woody Allen did. And of course, Spike Lee was from New York, and eventually Spike Lee was one of the main people on the audience in New York City, the Big Apple. Sorry to be saying, I'm just trying to think, because this was an excellent 30-30 ESPN on the old Knicks. Oh, now that's right. I was talking about Pat Riley. And of course, they had Patrick Ewing was the center, and he, of course, had played for the Georgetown Hoyas under Coach John Thompson Sr. I believe they had went to the championship finals about 3 years in a row, and Coach John Thompson, if I remember correctly, was credited with being the first Black coach to win Division I NCAA championship. And I don't know whether Patrick Ewing was born in Jamaica or had Jamaican parents, but Coach John Thompson, I believe he was born in Jamaica, and Patrick Ewing worked together to make things happen. And of course, later, Dikembe Mutombo played for Coach John Thompson, and they had shown on the TV. And I remember when there was a huge controversy about whether Allen Iverson should be given a chance to play for Georgetown. I even called into a talk show with John Thompson Sr., and I had mentioned about John didn't care about the criticism about bringing Allen Iverson on. And John was saying something about, he didn't care then, he doesn't care now. And Allen had mentioned how the Black governor of Virginia, Douglas Wilder, had gave him a pardon. Now, Doug Wilder did wind up running for president, and it didn't go anywhere, but people keep talking about Barack Obama was a senator, whereas Jesse Jackson was not. But they did have a number of black politicians who did have some government positions that ran, including Alan, a dark-skinned brother that went to Harvard. I think he was some sort of official from Maryland. I can't think of his last name, but he went over to Chicago. It might have been to challenge Barack Obama for, it might have been either a local position or it was probably for president. And that didn't go anywhere. Bobby Rush did defeat Barack, the ex-Black Panther, did defeat Barack Obama for one of the positions in Chi-Town, Chicago. And yeah, so, you know, we had that Douglas Wilder, and just kind of bear with me as I try to see. A lot of times I take notes, but then I figure, well, maybe I don't have to be so meticulous about doing these reviews of things. Let's see. So I guess I'm about to wind that down. Now, I did go to a CVS in DC just to talk about some of my personal issues, and I have a visual disability, and I told the lady that I have trouble seeing. She eventually apologized, and she's the store manager and on the 10th Street, and her English is not perfect, but she's obviously quite bright to be able to be the store manager. And of course, the thing was, I was telling about how somebody didn't help me till I was finished over there at the self-service. And she was like, well, we got somebody blind. We know he's blind. He probably didn't know. And that's why there should be policies in place that are enforced so that you don't have to know. Why should I have to identify myself as a person with a visual disability? Because I'm told I don't look it, but I'm clearly an older person. And a lot of times seniors and older people are known to have diminished vision. So they should help. When I trained for bartending, they said, well, if somebody didn't look 25, card them. And I was talking to a district manager at Giant. I think her name was Jones, but I believe she said if they didn't look 35 when she was working, that they would card them. The point is, if you can see that somebody's a little older, in particular, why not just help them until they're finished? They may not be able. It's common knowledge that many seniors have diminished vision. You don't know who might have a visual impairment. And these things are, particularly with announcing the price, are standard, traditional parts of retail business. So that's just a little pet peeve that I have. I'd also like to mention that somebody the other day was talking about, says, well, you know, you see a little less, but what about the person that has nothing? Would they not be happy to be in my position? And I think, I'm trying to remember, I know somewhere, I sent him an email, and I was saying, well, that person has the potential to do a lot of things that I can't, even if they did have nothing. I mean, they could drive a cab, a bus, an airplane, cashier. Now, I am aware that there are some totally blind people, and I hear this all the time, but the stats say that 70% are not working. They had an ad once that 70% of those who want to work are not working, the disabled. So people can point to one or two of them that are doing outstanding. That's like saying, well, Michael Jordan can earn big bucks playing basketball, but you don't judge the many by the few. And now I saw the ad on TV was talking about, they said there was a movie documentary about OJ called Made in America. Now, I had just watched several hours of it. It was very outstanding. I had learned some things that I either didn't know or forgot. Um, and I didn't realize that this was a movie that had been nominated for an Academy Award. When We Were Kings, which was the documentary about Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, had won an Oscar. And I was talking to a younger person about George, and he was saying, well, Norton was old when George knocked him down like that. And Norton had probably beat Ali not too long, maybe within a year or two, I would guess, before fighting Foreman. And I don't believe that people over 30 are washed up. I think you really begin to go downhill over 35, but I guess that's what young folks do. They like to knock, what the older folks watched, and maybe sometimes just assume that you're a person that just loves what happened in the old days and don't want to give the new ones any credit. But like I told him, I said, George was a beast, and just the sheer force that he had when he hit Norton, and the guy just seemed to fly to the canvas. And of course, everyone at the time was extremely impressed with Big George Foreman. So obviously, most people at the time did not feel that Foreman had crushed a washed-up fighter. George was bad. But let's see. So, yeah, so getting back to, let me see if there's a few things I might want to mention about the OJ documentary. And of course, there's been some have speculated that they put out all this stuff for OJ, maybe to try to help keep him from getting his parole. He's up for parole. You know, he had got convicted of kidnapping and a number of other things when he tried to get his property back. And he had a gun, and he said, nobody move. And OJ he had broke down and cried in the court, which, hey, what do you expect? The guy, had got exonerated for 2 murders, and now he was going to go go to jail over something kind of petty in a way, or just the technicalities of things. But let me think. I just might want to mention a few things I remember from that. It was a very outstanding documentary, but seem to be drawing a blank right now. Let me see. What did I see that? Oh, no, they were talking about how Jim Brown had the previous single season record. Now, I wasn't aware of that. And I do remember when OJ broke the 2,000 yard barrier. So one guy was saying, in the show, they were saying how the first coach that OJ had tried to throw him the ball and didn't have him run that much. And then this guy claimed that OJ wasn't good at catching the ball. I don't particularly remember OJ catching the ball either, but that they brought in another coach that would let OJ run. And then they were saying about how first he was trying to break Jim Brown's single season record. Then he went for 2,000 yards. And even nowadays with 16 games, not too many backs have gone over 2,000 yards. I know Eric Dickerson did, and I believe he now has the single season record for total yardage. And of course, OJ, they were saying about that, I think OJ had first started off getting a commercial for Chevrolet, and that it was very unusual for a black to have that big of an endorsement deal. Now, the one that I remember was OJ with the Hertz, where OJ would say was the superstar and rent a car. And he was running through the airports, and then they showed this old white lady talking about, go, OJ, go, which I do remember. And of course, later OJ did the sideline commentary for the football. And I was aware back in the day about OJ being in a movie with Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Bewitched, which was the Towering Inferno. But then they had mentioned that OJ was in a movie called The Killing Something with Elizabeth Montgomery, where I think she played the romantic interest. So let's see what else is going on. I guess I better get on up out of here. I'm sorry that I've jumped around a little bit, but I hope that this has been interesting to you. I'd ask that you push a thumbs up or a thumb down, subscribe, share this on your social media, and hopefully some of the younger people in particular might gain a little knowledge and insight about the sports that sports fans love. Maybe some of the older folks, maybe I might have been able to bring some things back to memory, or maybe a few things that you didn't happen to know about, because certainly when you watch these shows, they put out quite a bit of information. So let me see here. I usually have magnification on, but this time I don't, and I'm going to go ahead and shut this off.